In the heart of a quiet, tight-knit Latin American neighborhood, there lived a woman who seemed to embody everything pure, everything righteous. Camila Mendoza, a name that echoed through church halls and family gatherings alike, was the kind of wife people pointed to and said, "That's what a good Christian woman looks like." She was graceful, polite, always seen with her Bible, always surrounded by her two well-dressed children, always standing beside her husband Daniel, at least when the cameras were rolling. Behind closed doors, things were different, much different. This wasn't a story about a struggling marriage. This isn't about a woman who simply drifted from her vows. This is a story of manipulation, of power, and of a forbidden affair so twisted, so unfathomable, it would destroy 3 generations of a family and end with blood on the floor of a garage. Because Camila wasn't just cheating, she wasn't just lying, she was orchestrating. And the man she chose for her game was her own father-in-law, a respected church elder, a grieving widower, a man trusted by the entire community, and he never saw it coming. What happens when a woman weaponizes faith to get what she wants? When seduction disguises itself as spiritual connection? And when a mask of righteousness hides the face of a killer? You might think you know what a monster looks like, but in this story, the monster wears a cross and sings hymns on Sunday. Stay with me, because by the time we reach the end, you'll realize even the most perfect-looking lives can hide the darkest kind of evil. By the year 2010, the Mendoza family was still held up as a symbol of community success and Christian virtue. Daniel Mendoza, Camila's husband, had taken over most of the responsibilities at the family's chain of grocery stores. His father, Alejandro Mendoza, once the proud founder of the business, had stepped back from daily operations, choosing instead to focus on his faith and serve as a spiritual guide in the church. To the outside world, it seemed like a seamless transition. Alejandro was now a respected elder, delivering sermons, organizing Bible studies, offering marriage counseling to young couples. His reputation was untouchable, not just as a businessman, but as a man of unwavering conviction. And Camila? She played her role just as convincingly. She stayed home, raised the children, volunteered at every church event, brought food to sick neighbors. She was the angel of the community. But within the walls of her home, the cracks were forming. Daniel was always working. Early mornings, late nights, endless stress. Conversations between husband and wife had dwindled down to brief updates about money, groceries, and the children. No more love notes, no more date nights, just routine. Camila was lonely, but she didn't show it. She smiled for the neighbors. She led the prayer circles, but in private, she was drifting, starved for attention, for validation, for power. And when Alejandro began spending more time at the house, helping around, watching the grandkids, filling the space Daniel had left empty, something shifted. Camila wasn't just looking for comfort. She was looking for control. And Alejandro, still mourning the death of his wife, was more vulnerable than he realized. He thought he was being helpful. He thought he was offering guidance. He had no idea that the woman calling him Dad was about to become his downfall. It started innocently enough. A conversation after church, a warm smile at a family dinner, a shared laugh over old memories. Camila and Alejandro, daughter-in-law and father-in-law, bonded over grief, over exhaustion, over feeling invisible. He missed his wife. She missed her husband. They spoke of God, of loneliness, of forgiveness. And little by little, the boundaries blurred. It was Alejandro who first began to visit more frequently, sometimes to help with the garden, sometimes to drop off groceries, but always he stayed a little longer than he should have. A cup of coffee turned into an hour-long conversation. A comforting hand on the shoulder lingered a little too long. The air between them shifted, from familial to something else. Camila, ever composed, knew exactly what was happening, and she let it. Because in Alejandro, she saw not just a grieving old man, but a man with influence, a man respected by everyone, a man who could be molded. If she played her part well enough, she didn't need to touch him. Not yet. All she had to do was talk, and listen, and be the one person who made him feel seen again. By early 2011, their connection had deepened into something more than just emotional comfort. There were lingering stares, hushed tones, glances filled with attention neither of them dared to name, but both of them felt. And when the first kiss happened, it wasn't a moment of passion. It was a transaction. Camila knew exactly what she was doing, and Alejandro, for all his sermons and scriptures, chose silence over self-restraint. From that moment on, there was no turning back. They had crossed a line, and Camila was just getting started. For most men, guilt would have been a wall. But for Alejandro, guilt became a chain, one that Camila knew exactly how to pull. She didn't seduce him with skin. She seduced him with sorrow, with scripture, with vulnerability. "It's not lust," she whispered one night, tears welling in her eyes. "It's comfort. God understands. He knows we're both broken." And Alejandro, already drowning in remorse, clung to that twisted logic like a lifeline. Camila wrapped their sin in sanctity, quoting verses about love and sacrifice, pain and healing. Every time Alejandro wavered, she brought him back, not with threats, but with the soft voice of a woman who seemed to understand him like no one else ever had. She became his spiritual weakness and his obsession. But for Camila, it wasn't about love. It was about leverage. Every whispered confession, every late-night embrace, every moment of forbidden intimacy, it all became a thread in her web. She was patient, calculating. She spoke of Daniel not with anger, but with sadness. "He doesn't see me anymore, Alejandro. He's forgotten I'm even here." And slowly, Daniel, her husband, Alejandro's son, became not just an obstacle, but a problem to be solved. Camila knew Alejandro would never harm anyone on his own. But if she could twist his faith, his grief, his guilt just right, she wouldn't have to get blood on her hands. She could let him do it for her. And he would think it was an act of love. By early 2013, Camila had perfected the performance. To the outside world, she was still the devoted wife, the loyal daughter-in-law, the faithful believer who never missed a Sunday service. But behind closed doors, she was something else entirely. She was an architect, and her blueprint was death. She began to sow the seeds carefully, never pushing too hard. In casual conversations, she'd mention how Daniel had grown distant, how he no longer cared for the children, how he didn't listen, how he only lived for the store. "You deserve better," she'd whisper to Alejandro as he rubbed his tired eyes. "You've always been the only one who truly saw me." Alejandro, already trapped in the emotional fog of their affair, began to internalize her words. He started seeing Daniel not just as a son, but as an obstruction, a cold figure who ignored his wife, neglected his father, and pushed them both into isolation. Camila didn't have to beg for violence. She simply built the case for it. She spoke of suffering, of liberation, of divine justice. "Maybe God brought us together for a reason," she said one night, her voice trembling. A performance honed over years of silent resentment. Maybe Daniel's absence from our lives isn't just tragic. Maybe it's necessary. Alejandro didn't answer, but in his silence, something shifted. Camilla began planning. Not a detailed blueprint, not yet. But she was watching, waiting. She learned his schedule, his habits. She noted when he stayed late at the store, when he worked alone in the garage. Every moment became a calculation. And as she knelt in prayer beside her children each night, a different kind of prayer echoed in her mind. Let it happen. Let it finally end. Because for Camilla, this wasn't about freedom anymore. This was about power. And Daniel was in the way. March 6th, 2014, began like any other day. Daniel rose early, kissed his kids on the forehead, and left for the store. Camilla packed the lunches, smiled as they left for school. She even texted Daniel mid-morning to remind him to grab milk on the way home. Everything seemed normal, until the sun went down. That evening, the Mendoza household was still, almost too still. The children were at a neighbor's house. Camilla claimed she was preparing dinner, but in the garage, Daniel lay dead. His skull shattered by a single brutal blow from a heavy wrench. Blood pooled beneath his body, soaking into the concrete floor, where he once fixed toys for his son, where he used to hum old songs while working on car repairs. Now, it was a crime scene. No signs of forced entry, no valuables missing, no evidence of a break-in. To Detective Luis Herrera, it didn't look like a robbery gone wrong. It looked personal. When officers arrived, Camilla played her part. She screamed, cried, collapsed in the arms of neighbors. But something about her tears didn't sit right. They came too easily, too fast. Her eyes were red, but dry. Herrera noted it immediately. And when he asked her about Daniel's day, she spoke with chilling composure. No hesitation, no emotion. It wasn't grief, it was rehearsal. As the neighbors gathered outside the Mendoza home, stunned by the tragedy, the whispers began to spread. How could this happen to such a good family? But inside, Herrera knew. This family wasn't what it seemed. And Camilla wasn't the woman they thought she was. Camilla wore her mask well, at first. She dressed in black, attended the memorial, held her children tightly as mourners passed by. She even read a verse at Daniel's funeral, her voice breaking at all the right moments. But Herrera kept watching. In the days that followed, she barely changed her routine. She took the kids to school, shopped for groceries, attended church. No sleepless nights, no tear-streaked cheeks, no signs of a woman shattered by grief. And then, the phone. On March 20th, investigators found a second phone hidden inside a shoebox in Camilla's closet. It wasn't listed in any family plan. It wasn't something Daniel would have known about. What it contained changed everything. Hundreds of text messages between Camilla and Alejandro. Explicit messages, romantic messages, and then messages about Daniel, about removing him, about being free, about how they'd finally have peace once he was gone. Herrera read through each one with a growing chill. The most damning part? The messages weren't vague. They mentioned dates, methods, even the garage. Alejandro's replies were hesitant, full of guilt. But he never said no. And Camila? She was relentless. Herrera knew then. The grieving wife was a lie. This wasn't a woman mourning her husband. This was a woman who had already planned her next move. And her co-conspirator? was Daniel's own father. When investigators brought Alejandro in for questioning on April 1st, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Gone was the stoic church elder, the respected pillar of the community. In his place sat a trembling, hollow shell of a man, eyes sunken, hands shaking, his once steady voice reduced to a whisper. Detective Herrera slid the phone across the table. No accusations, no theatrics, just the evidence. Alejandro stared at the screen. For a long time he said nothing. His eyes scanned the words, the ones he had written, the ones Camilla had sent. It was all there. The affair, the manipulation, the hints of murder, and the unbearable guilt. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like dry wood. "I didn't mean for any of this," he said. I didn't want him to die." And then the story began to spill out. Not in a rehearsed timeline, but in fragments, in confessions wrapped in pain. He talked about Camilla, how she had comforted him in his grief, how her presence filled the void left by his late wife. He talked about how it started with prayer, then evolved into secret touches, stolen moments, and finally, something deeper, something darker. He admitted to loving her, but more than that, he admitted to being consumed by her. She knew what to say, what I needed to hear, he murmured. She made me feel like I was needed again, like God had a plan for us. But when it came to the night of Daniel's murder, Alejandro hesitated. He denied being there, denied delivering the fatal blow. "I knew what she wanted," he said, "but I didn't do it. I swear to you, I didn't." Herrera watched him closely. A man drowning in guilt. A man who might not have swung the weapon, but who'd handed it over, emotionally and morally, long before the blood ever spilled. And in that room, the truth became painfully clear. Even if he hadn't killed his son with his hands, he had helped build the path to that garage. One lie, one prayer, one touch at a time. The trial began in early 2015, and from day one, the courthouse was overflowing. Locals lined the sidewalks, reporters set up outside, church members, former friends, curious neighbors, all crammed into wooden benches, eager to witness the fall of a family that once stood for faith, unity, and respect. At the center of it all sat Camilla, still elegant, still composed, still unnervingly calm. She wore black every day, a small cross around her neck. No outbursts, no tears, just stillness. Alejandro, by contrast, looked like he had aged a decade overnight. He shuffled into court, hunched, pale, with eyes that never met anyone else's. He cried often, during testimonies, during lunch recesses, even during the opening statement. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Camilla was the mastermind. She had seduced, manipulated, and emotionally dismantled a grieving man until he was willing to betray his own blood. They played the recordings, displayed the text messages. Camilla's words weren't just suggestive, they were strategic. "We'll be free soon. It has to be done. You and I deserve peace." The defense tried to claim it was all fantasy, that Camilla had merely entertained Alejandro's obsession, that he was the predator. But then came Alejandro's testimony. He didn't deny the affair, he didn't defend himself. Instead, he confessed. He told the court how Camilla pulled him in, how she used her sorrow as bait, her beauty as leverage, and her religion as armor. He admitted that he had been willing to do anything for her, that he loved her, that he thought she loved him too. But as he looked across the courtroom at her, she never looked back. Camilla sat stone-faced, not a flicker of remorse, not even as he sobbed. To the jury, The contrast was chilling. One had been consumed by guilt, the other by ambition. And in that cold, silent courtroom, it became clear. This wasn't just a murder. It was a performance. And Camilla had always been center stage. October 10th, 2015. Camilla Mendoza was found guilty of first-degree murder. She showed no visible reaction as the sentence was read. Life in prison. Alejandro Mendoza, once a man of faith, once a father, once a shepherd to his community, was convicted of lesser charges. He was spared a life sentence, but not the lifetime of regret that followed him. The courtroom emptied. The reporters packed up. But for those left behind, the Mendoza children, the congregation, the neighbors who once looked up to them, the story never really ended. Sophia, 17, once proudly held her mother's hand in church. Now, she couldn't even say her name without her voice cracking. Gabriel, only 13, used to build toy boats in that garage with his dad. Now, he never goes near tools. The grocery business collapsed. The church split in two. Some forgave. Some never would. But the real damage, the kind you don't see in headlines, was internal, emotional, permanent. Because what made this crime truly unbearable wasn't just the betrayal or the bloodshed. It was how faith itself was used like a weapon, how scripture became seduction, how comfort disguised manipulation, how a woman with a Bible in her hands led a man of God down a path darker than he ever imagined. We often think monsters look like strangers hiding in the shadows. But sometimes, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who smile at the dinner table, the ones who say, "Amen," louder than anyone else, the ones who use your trust, your grief, your belief as a leash. This case isn't just about murder. It's about how vulnerability can be twisted, and how silence can kill just as surely as a weapon. If there's one thing to take away from this story, it's this: pay attention to the quiet shifts, to the people who suddenly want too much of your time, to the words that sound like comfort but feel like control, to the masks, no matter how polished, that never seem to come off. And most of all, never ignore the voice inside you that whispers, "Something's not right." Because in the end, it's not always the loudest scream that signals danger. Sometimes, it's the softest whisper behind a locked door.